All right, ready, everyone?
Let's do this.
Here we go. We're on.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday, October 10th, World Mental Health Day. We are so excited to have you here. We're going to jump into introductions here pretty quickly, but grateful to share time with you today until about 1:15 or however long you can stay. My name is Kaela Scott. I am the Director of Clinical Services at the Looking Glass Foundation and a registered clinical counselor. I will be leading this panel today with lots of our wonderful experts that will be here as well to contribute and share. You're going to see possibly up on your screen that Elisa is here as well. She is our Director of Communications and Development, as well as Lisa is here. She is our Executive Director. They're going to help me with some of the pieces on the back end, and they'll be the ones collecting questions and waiting to gather that information at the end. So thank you for being here. We're excited to jump right in. Elisa, if you want to jump to the next slide, we will get started and just kind of do our brief introductions and let everybody know kind of the format of today. So if you prefer to remain anonymous, now is a great time to change your username. Only us panelists can see your name just so that everybody knows. I think most of you are aware that this is being recorded. Hopefully that means that we can provide this to other people as they are looking to gather this information as well. Please feel free to type your questions in the questions and answer chat box as we go. If your question is directed to a specific panelist, make sure you include their name so that we know at the end who is to answer that. I want to be really encouraging in terms of asking any question that comes up. I think sometimes we can hold back even though we're curious about things, and the more questions that get asked, the more that everybody can learn and understand. Mental health is obviously a very, very broad topic, and something that I think all of us, even those of us in the field, are still learning about and growing within our understanding. So any question that comes up, please stick it in the chat and we will save the questions till the end at the Q&A period. We will be answering questions also based on each of us providing the information that feels relevant to the topic at hand, but there might be times that we bounce back and forth between as we engage in discussion around what comes up. So Melissa, we can jump. Thank you. So who are our panelists? I have introduced myself. Again, I'm Kaela Scott. We also have Ally Choo with us. She's a registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor and founder of Body Respect Nutrition. We have Maeve Gale with us. She's a registered clinical counselor with us here at the Looking Glass Foundation and also has her own private practice at Maeve Counseling. And then we have Poonam Jassi, who's the Vice President of Operations at Functionability and a board member of ours here at the Looking Glass Foundation. All right, gang. Before we get started, I'm going to jump into a land acknowledgement. Let me just pull this up here and make sure I've got it right. So, oopsie, so 1 second, gang. I just closed it, of course. So to start today, we want to do a land acknowledgement that here at Looking Glass, we're situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The Coast Salish peoples have inhabited and cared for these lands since time immemorial, and we take this time to show our gratitude and respect to them and to the land for all that it provides. If you're joining from other areas, we invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the land you presently find yourself situated on. Before we jump in today, I want to provide a quick trigger warning. We are going to be exploring various topics that may be difficult for some of you. If you feel at any time that you need to take a break and step out from the webinar to take care of yourself, please do this. You're welcome to return whenever you're ready. There will be things that some of us speak to pertaining to mental health at large. And sometimes as we provide these strategies, there could be particular populations or specialized populations where this brings up certain feelings or certain thoughts, please know that this webinar is intended to be fairly broad, with us touching on eating disorders in a more kind of generalized format as that comes up. It is not intended to act as a main form of support. So if there's things that come up in this that you are looking for support, please know that you can reach out either to us at Looking Glass or to the support people within your life. Wonderful. Lisa, let's jump on through. So I'm going to speak here to the mental health framework and boundaries. That will be my topic before I hand it over to my wonderful colleagues here that are joining us. So in this presentation, again, we're going to speak to some high-level areas that play a big role in our wellness. For those who struggle with an eating disorder, these things also play a big role in our recovery. What we were focusing on today obviously probably won't meet all of your needs, and it's not intended to replace therapy, but there will be more resources available. So jumping into what is mental health. Mental health is the state of our psychological well-being that really helps us cope with life events, stressors, and circumstances. Our social lives are brought into our mental health. Our emotional well-being is brought into our mental health. When we think of mental health, what's important, I think, for all of us to pay attention to is that every single human has mental health, the same way that we have physical health. There's varying degrees. Obviously, some of us can have pretty solid mental health where we feel like day to day we're doing fairly well. We can feel like our energy is good. The way that we are coping and managing life feels pretty good. And even those whose mental health is kind of at a prime, we still have days that we feel kind of like a bit more rough, that maybe we're feeling our emotions are higher or things feel harder for us. Sometimes our coping mechanisms are being leaned into more than others. It's really important that we give ourselves permission to know how normal it is for all of us to have good days and bad days. I would argue in our current world, most of us experience fluctuations pretty frequently. Sometimes that's, for some of us, that's daily. For some of us, that's weekly or monthly. There's so many different things that I think can affect whether we're feeling good or whether we're having a hard day. I think in our population that we see, and I think at the world at large, there's lots of pieces that can be impacted by mental health. So how we connect with others can be impacted. Whether or not our self-perception feels really healthy and really strong is affected by our mental health. I think these things all can lead to greater discomfort or struggle, and a change in how we function or operate in our life. What we want to make sure that we are paying attention to is whether or not there's things in particular that we know trigger our mental health. And that's for the good and sometimes for kind of the bad, or the ways that make us feel like life is a little bit more difficult to deal with. So often when we have a focus on mental health, we're framing that more and like, these are the things that make me not feel good in life, or these are the things that end up affecting how I'm coping. And by all means, it's always important to be aware of what might tip us over. But I also think when it comes to mental health, it's really important that we talk about what makes us feel really good. Today, again, we're going to be covering some of those topics as well. But for everybody and their mental health, one of the most important things that we can do is really personalize this. I don't know about you, but I think all of us are kind of friends, or at least very familiar with Google, and we can very quickly like type in, how can I improve my mental health? What a great thing to do, but know that when it comes to mental health, it's not a one size fits all by any means. I think we have to make sure we're paying really close attention to the things that tick for us, and the things that don't. What we see often at Looking Glass, and definitely what I see in my practice, is people talking a lot about a diagnosis. Does it matter if I've got a formal diagnosis around whether that be depression or anxiety, or in our population, an eating disorder? A diagnosis is kind of what determines a clinical significant amount of struggle within our mental health. Does it matter? I think that depends. I think a diagnosis is really it's kind of a medical, in our field, it's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that checks off some boxes. But I would say most of us can have clinically significant impacts with our mental health and not a formal diagnosis. That doesn't determine whether or not you are struggling or whether or not what you're going through is real. In my practice, specialized in eating disorders, I would say maybe 10% of the population I work with has a formal diagnosis. 90% don't. Of the 90% that don't, I would argue probably 89% of those individuals would probably meet a clinical diagnosis for an eating disorder or for depression or for anxiety. So the clinical diagnosis is simply there to say this is impacting your life in a pretty big way. This is impacting how you show up, how you're coping. Often when we have a clinical diagnosis, it can mean that our mental health is presenting on a more daily basis versus on a like monthly or a couple times a year. Some of you here today might know that as the change of fall, lots of people feel like they recognize the seasonal affective disorder starts to kick in. But other times of the year they can feel well. Those are the things that we recognize as a more very much real and important and significant impact on mental health, but maybe not something that applies to us day in and day out. So Melissa, we can skip ahead. So how do we develop our own mental health language and gauge? This is really, really important. Communicating your mental health needs is one of the strongest tools I think you could have in your toolbox because it helps not only you get your own needs met, but also others meet your needs in a way that feels helpful for you. I don't know who's on here today, but if any of you have ever had the experience of sharing, well, my hope and wish is that everybody has received that and engaged with you in a really healthy, helpful way. I think sometimes when we choose to share what we're going through, it doesn't always land with our population the way that our support population in the way that we're hoping, which is why it's really important that you take a few moments to think about like, what is it that my mental health really brings to my life? What are the ways that it impacts me? What are the ways in which I feel like I'm missing support or missing kind of the needs that I have in my life in order to be able to feel like I can have the level of fulfillment and connection that I'm looking for. I also think it's really important, and this can be done on a scale of 1 to 10, various other scales, to just be like, how am I doing in terms of my mental health? Once we develop a language, I would actually encourage all of you to write this down. These are the things that I'm struggling with. These are the ways in which I need support. And this is how I'm doing. If we know, for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being that we're really struggling, 10 being we're living our best life, when we reach out and start to talk to people about it, we also know the level of kind of support and connection that might be needed. So at a 7, we might need somebody to give us a hug, tell us we're doing a good job, and connect with us in a way that's more through like gentle support, gentle affirmation. If we're coming in at a 3, it might mean that we need greater connection, greater support, and perhaps greater intervention. Some of that, it can mean like, hey, I might need to lean into therapy again, or the people in my life that, the professionals in my life that support me in this area. I think what is important is that you know what it is that is affecting you, how it's affecting you, and what kind of support you're looking for. The more specific and the more clear that we are on this, the more that people are going to be able to show up. Now, in terms of figuring out your support team, as much as we always hope that those closest to us will be on our support team, I think we don't always know that. What's more important is that you look at who makes you feel the way you want to feel when you are sharing what it is that you're going through. That might be your best friend, that might be a parent, that might be a colleague. Sometimes it's somebody that we've gone through, say, forms of treatment with or had various forms of support with. It can be a therapist, it could be a dietitian, it can be an occupational therapist, like you name it. Whoever it is that you actually feel helps you feel the way you want and need to feel when you're struggling. Again, this is the reason why we want to make sure that we're touching onto that language, so that when you go to them, they're able to actually meet those needs and they know exactly what it is that you're looking for. Thanks, Elisa. In terms of setting boundaries, so most of us are quite familiar with the term boundaries. We've been told we need to set them. We get told sometimes we don't have them, or we recognize within ourselves how we can struggle with boundaries. I think what's really important that all of us look at is most of us hear that boundaries is like saying no to something or turning away from something. And that is very much true. I think we need to know when something isn't working for us. But what is also extremely important is that we take the time to actually do the follow through with that. So instead of, no, this doesn't work for me, it can be, no, this doesn't work for me, but this does, right? So we give people the feedback that they need in order to actually meet the needs that we have around the boundary that is being set. So a really common example sometimes can be even around support. So it doesn't work for me when you jump straight into problem solving. Instead, it would be really helpful if you just listened and provided me verbal affirmation that I'm trying my hardest. When we give people specific feedback, they actually know then how to work within the realms of the relationship and the boundaries of the relationship that are being set. It gives people an easy way to feel like they can be successful. This is really important because connection is so important in our for our mental health, that being able to give them specific guidelines means that your needs will be met and they'll feel like they can stay close to you without getting it wrong. There are two different types of boundaries that I think are also really important to address. This is very much true within our eating disorder population as well, and that's internal versus external boundaries. So internal boundaries are the boundaries we actually have to set with ourselves. So often we think about boundaries with like the outside world and how we tell other people about what works or doesn't work for us, but we don't recognize that the person that can sometimes be crossing our own boundaries the most is ourselves. I really recommend when it comes to internal boundaries, we write down the ways in which we are harming or betraying ourselves and look at how we could do that differently. In this work with eating disorders, sometimes this shows up pertaining to, I really want to be able to focus on, say, the nutrition side of my recovery. And every time I go to sit down to a snack or sit down to a meal, I don't follow the meal plan that I've been given, or I really want to make sure that I'm saying yes to some of the social connections because I've been isolating a lot. So how do I make sure that when somebody asks, instead of my automatic reaction being no, because it feels safer to isolate, I'm going to say, do you know what? That upcoming event that's, in a week from now, I'm going to choose to go to and attend because that will actually be better for my mental health than staying at home. External boundaries are to do with the relationships we have with people outside of us. This can be anybody and everybody. Sometimes it's work boundaries that we need to set, letting people know when we're going to be at work, when we're not going to be at work. Sometimes that's with family members. We are bumping into a holiday this upcoming weekend, which can sometimes require more social gatherings, making sure that we look at the terms in which those types of social gatherings will work for us. Again, this is a great place where we say, it might mean no in this way, but it means yes in this way. A good place to make sure that we're giving people clear feedback around how they can show up for us and also how we can show up for them. Okay. The thing with boundaries, because we hear about them a lot, is most people don't do boundaries perfectly. I talk about boundaries, it feels like all day, every day in my work. And it is still very much a work in progress for myself in my own life. We want to know that sometimes we set a boundary and then the other 4 boundaries that might get crossed that day, we actually don't attend to because our capacity to tolerate the discomfort that can come sometimes from setting boundaries is maxed out at our first effort. This is completely normal and actually really healthy. Our biggest piece that we want to make sure we're coming back to is that we are still focusing on making progress. If something doesn't go well the first time, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try again. If you had a day where you were really successful at setting boundaries, you might notice that there can almost be a bit of a hangover effect from that, an emotional hangover. And the next day you're like, I didn't set any. This is really, really normal. What matters most is that you are working on continuing to set boundaries and knowing that at some point, some of the ones that were initially really, really hard will end up feeling easy and like a bit of a no-brainer. And then we'll add in more as our capacity allows for. All right. Lisa will slip into the introduction, I think, to Ally next. So Ally, we're so grateful to have you here today and have your wonderful wisdom. Thank you for showing up. Ally's, again, a registered dietitian, a certified intuitive eating counselor, and the founder of Body Respect Nutrition. Ally, thank you for being here today and for the insightful ways that you're going to show how nutrition affects our mental health.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaela. And I just want to do a little disclaimer. I do live beside a fire hall. So if you hear sirens, please, yeah, give me a little grace for that. But I'm so excited to be here and we're ready to go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how nutrition can really impact our mental health. So what people don't realize is that, there is this bidirectional link between the gut and the brain. And it's through the communication between our gut microbiota. So that's our bacteria that lives in our gut and our neurons in our central nervous system. So, there are over 100 million neurons in the gut, which is less than the spinal cord, but I'm sorry, less than the brain, but more than the spinal cord. And that's why our human gut is sometimes referred to as that second brain, because of how extensive the network of neurons and neurotransmitters are and how that impacts our mental health. There is a fun fact, about 90% of our serotonin production is created in the gut. So our gut actually has these specialized cells that create that serotonin neurotransmitter. So let's talk about protein. Adequate dietary protein from sources such as eggs, soy, nuts, seeds, fish, and meat are essential for neurotransmitter synthesis. So neurotransmitters have an amino acid backbone, and that includes serotonin. So serotonin is important for regulating mood, sleep, appetite, and digestion. Dopamine, right, for learning new behaviors, also regulating emotions, seeking pleasure and reward, and norepinephrine, right, so attention and stress management. So if we're not having enough protein, our body just doesn't have enough of those tools to create these neurotransmitters. When we talk about fats, what we often forget is that the brain is mostly made up of fat. Approximately 80% of its structure is derived from fat components. From a nutritional perspective, the fats we consume in our diet directly impact the fatty acids in our neuronal cell membrane, so influencing their structure, the fluidity, and overall function of the brain. Fat also provides taste, mental satisfaction, and satiety, which allows the brain to just feel really calm and satisfied after a meal instead of continuously searching for food or thinking about food. Moving on to carbohydrates. So when I think about carbohydrates, I really just think about energy. And I want you to think about this brain as this really metabolically expensive or kind of like hungry CEO, right? It kind of needs a ton of energy to function well. The thing about the brain is that it can't store glucose. So it needs this constant supply through our food intake throughout the day in order to function optimally. And so when the brain is functioning optimally, this looks like making decisions or critically thinking about problems or regulating our emotions, right? All of that higher processing. So this is where carbs come in. Carbs, whether it comes from a quinoa salad or a cookie, right? It all gets broken down into glucose and it goes into our bloodstream. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and it helps our brain function well. And that's what our brain uses for fuel. So it's incredibly important for our mental well-being. The last thing I wanted to talk about was fiber. So fiber plays a significant role in our mental health due to its impact on our gut microbiota, again, that bacteria that lives in our gut. What we found in the research is that the ecosystem of bacteria in our gut helps to regulate inflammation in the body. It improves our immune function. It also produces those neurotransmitters that we talked about before. So fiber is essentially food for our gut bugs, and having lots of different types and colors in our diet can really help to improve that diversity in our microbiota. So, some bugs really like to eat, let's say, artichokes, others really like to eat garlic, right? So having lots of variety is really helpful for that diversity. We can move on to the next slide here. I wanted to put together some practical tips to improve our mental health. So the first tip is eating enough and often enough. So the first thing I often teach my clients is to really focus on the when before we even talk about the what to eat. So this can look like, making sure you have lots of opportunities to give your body those tools that it needs, right? So 3 meals, 2 to 3 snacks a day, about every 2 to 3 hours apart. We have to remember that our metabolism is the rate at which food gets turned into energy, right? And so in order to have that optimal metabolism, or sometimes I like to think about, a fire, if we're continually feeding the fire with the wood that it needs to burn, it will really burn optimally and give our body that energy it needs to repair and build and function well. The second tip is thinking about your blender. So we know that stable blood sugars improves our mental health by supplying the brain with a really nice steady supply of glucose throughout the day. So our body doesn't like to have these like spikes of blood sugar and drops of blood sugar, and that can actually be really stressful on the body. So how do we keep our blood sugar stable throughout the day? I want you to think about your digestion like a blender. So if you can see on this plate here, all food groups digest at different rates. So you can see there's carbs, there's protein, there's vegetables and fruits, there's fats, and there's a calcium rich. Doesn't need to be dairy. So if you're thinking about your blender and you're thinking, okay, so my brain needs carbohydrates, but I need to extend, the amount of energy that I get from that. One way to do that is by adding some protein into your blender, right? Protein's really complex and dense. It takes longer for your blender to blend. Another way to do that is by adding fiber. I like to think about like adding sticks to your blender, right? Can't really digest it, but it does get in the way. Fats also slow down the blender. Calcium-rich components slow down your blender. And so as everything's blending at a really nice rate, you'll see this really nice rise in your blood sugars. It'll hold you for 2 to 3 hours, and then it'll fall at a really nice rate. And what we see with our mental health is, we're a lot more emotionally regulated. We can think a lot clearer, right? Maybe that email that you normally, would send you over the edge, right? You can actually read it and take a deep breath and think about your response. The last tip is just reminding yourself that all foods provide nutrition, right? When we look at nutrition in this way, we can feel really confident in our eating decisions. So instead of using these all or nothing statements like this is good or bad or healthy or unhealthy or clean or unclean, right? If we actually use factual language like this is carb based, this is fat based, right? How does the protein impact my blender? So for example, let's take an Oreo cookie. Those are my favorite cookies. They're super nostalgic. I know they're super carb based, right? And they're going to blend really fast. So how can I slow down my blender so that that energy lasts me through this meeting or through this webinar, right? My favorite way is to add some Greek yogurt to that snack. So I crush my Oreos into that Greek yogurt. I'm adding that fat and that protein, and that's going to really last me until my next meal or snack. Okay, next slide here. I wanted to share some common diet culture and nutrition myths I often hear in my practice. The first one is, following a low carb diet will help you to lose weight. So what many people don't realize is that carbohydrates and protein provide the same amount of energy or calories per gram. So where did this myth come from? So while you may see a quick drop on the scale initially after reducing your carb intake, much of this is actually due to fluid loss. So if you look at the word carbohydrate, you can see that carbs have a very important role in hydrating the body and help us to actually absorb water in our digestive tract. In addition, when the body stores glucose in the form of glycogen in our muscles and in our liver, so that storage form of glucose, 1 gram of glycogen can hang on to 4 grams of water. So when we stop eating carbohydrates, we're actually essentially burning through our glycogen stores, dehydrating the body, which is why we might feel constipated or fatigued or be prone to headaches, because we are feeling that dehydration in the body. And then when we essentially eat carbs, we're rehydrating the body. The second myth I often hear is, you should never eat after X time, right? I put 7 p.m. here, but I feel like it always changes in diet culture. So contrary to popular belief, our bodies cannot tell time, and our metabolism doesn't magically shut off at night. If it did, I think we would all perish overnight, right? So it's really good that our metabolism is 24/7, and our body requires energy all the time to keep our brain working, our heart pumping, and our lungs breathing, even if we're winding down or sleeping. So what's really important to remember is that hunger starts at a cellular level, meaning that if your body is sending you hunger signals, regardless of the time of day, it's because our cells are really asking for energy to do their job. So bottom line, eat when you're hungry, or, with the guidance of your healthcare team, if you haven't repaired your hunger cues yet. But yeah, bottom line, hunger is a good thing. Next slide. So lastly, kind of just putting this all together, why is nutrition so important for eating disorder recovery? In order to do that deeper work, if whether you're working with a therapist or on your own, challenging diet culture, trying to improve your body image, we really need to focus on food in order to help our brain and our nervous system really just feel safe. And one way that I like to explain this is by using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is the theory of human development that Maslow put together. And he posits that in order for us to ascend the pyramid of human development and, reach our full potential, we need to meet our needs lower down. So you can see on the most bottom level, our most basic needs are food, water, warmth, and rest. And so when we're dieting or when we're engaging in eating disorders behaviors, we really aren't meeting our most basic needs. And we often forget that our cells are really primitive, right? They don't know that we live in 2024 where food is really abundant. If they sense that there isn't enough food in the environment, they actually experience that as a famine. And so if your body doesn't feel safe and it feels like the environment is, not safe, then of course we're not going to meet our safety needs, right? Our nervous system isn't going to feel safe or secure. And if we don't feel safe or secure and we're hyper vigilant and we're looking for threats and we're, feeling like something might attack us at any moment, are we going to be able to open up and be vulnerable and meet our love and belonging needs, right? It's going to be really hard to meet those needs and be your authentic self. And if we don't have that tribe or that community, it's really hard for us to build our own self-esteem and really know our worth outside of any external factors or praise. And then, if we don't have that, it's really hard for us to reach our full potential, right? So you can see at the basis of everything, at all of the hard work you're doing, we got to make sure that we're eating enough in order for that brain to do that hard work. Okay, I tried to pack in as much as I could. In the next slide, if you do want to connect, I did put my website there. I'm not sure if Elisa had that in here, but please reach out if you'd like to connect further or if you have any questions, and I'll hand it back over to Kaela.
Awesome. Thanks, Ally. That's so fascinating to think about how it really is. Nutrition really is the foundation of all other kind of good things happening in our life, right? And that connection between the gut and brain. And also, I think I loved how you spoke so thoroughly about the importance of every food group, because I think diet culture really does tell us to focus on eating only at certain times or only eating certain foods, and instills a lot of fear in us. So this was really insightful for us to realize that like every food serves its purpose, and how so often, again, with diet culture and the carb fear that comes up with definitely the eating disorder population, but I think population at large, is how much that also feeds our brain. And we can't really be mentally well if our brain isn't being fed. So really insightful. Thank you. I'm now going to bring Maeve Gale in. Maeve is a registered clinical counselor here with Looking Glass and also Maeve Counseling. Maeve, I'm really looking forward to your presentation on self-care and helping people understand how they really can care for themselves and their mental wealth. I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ally. Yeah, that was wonderful. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about self-care and nourishing the soul. So self-care is often presented as an escape from our regular life. And sometimes, turning your phone off, having a spa day is a wonderful way to rejuvenate. But at its core, self-care is really a commitment to what you value and care about deeply to ensure that you feel well and positive about your life. So we can frame self-care in terms of nourishment. What are you filling your body, your heart, your mind, and your time with? How are you nourishing all these parts of yourself? So if we jump to the next slide, I'd like to talk about first what self-care is not. So self-care is not a one-time fix, right? It's an evolving continuous practice that might shift and change as you self-reflect on what you value, what you need, and as you go through changes in your life, which might sound like hard work, but can also be really creative and fun to shift your self-care according to your needs. Self-care is also definitely not a one-size-fits-all, kind of like Kaela was mentioning about mental health in general, right? What might be meaningful and supportive and caring for one person might really not be the case for another. So I think about this in terms of if you're healing your relationship with your body, if you're in recovery from an eating disorder, self-care might involve finding much more gentle forms of movement, listening to your body's needs for rest. Whereas for someone else, it might involve exercising more, adding more movement, okay? Both of those are so valuable, but for entirely different people. A third thing that self-care is definitely not is only pampering. It's not just buying something advertised as self-care, which we see a lot these days. And don't get me wrong, I'm pro baked goods, I'm pro manicures. But looking only towards those self-care practices that are external can keep us trapped in this system that tells us we need to buy our way into value alignment, right? Being purchase-driven is not the same as sustainable nurturing for your inner self and for your community. And speaking of community, I think the last and maybe most important thing to know that self-care is not is it's not selfish. I'm sure many of us have heard that example of, put on your own oxygen mask before putting on someone else's. But I think it actually goes further than that. Self-care doesn't come before community care, it's part of it. Self-care affects how we handle conflicts, how we invest our time and money. And when we care for ourselves, we have the energy to care for other people and to start addressing broken elements of our systems and our communities. And that's really exciting and really important. So if we could go on to the next slide. If all of that is what self-care is not, I think it's also important to reflect on what self-care is. And I really like the very short summary of self-care is intentional actions for well-being. And of course, categories are always tricky, right? These categories aren't totally separate. There's fuzzy borders, but generally we can divide self-care into physical, caring for your physical body, emotional, connecting to your emotions and seeking to understand them, mental, which means not just resting your brain, but also stimulating it in exciting and important ways, spiritual, and social. Some people get tripped up on spiritual because that can be quite a spectrum, but I like to think of it as connecting to anything that feels larger than yourself. So that might be the land, it might be even art and other people. And similarly with social, that's not always just about meeting more people, connecting with more. It can be, but it can also be setting boundaries and protecting your solitude when you need it. And I think it's really important. Oh, we're going to jump back just for a minute. I think it's important to remember in considering these areas to always bring it back to what you need and value, because there's always going to be shoulds out there, right? We have narratives from all kinds of sources yelling at us that we should meditate for an hour every day, should drink the green juice. Maybe that works for you. Maybe you hate green juice. Kind of speaking for myself here. So being intentional and self-reflective about what's good for you. Now we can jump on next to the next slide. So with all this information, feels like the next step is, okay, how to put all that into action. And everyone's plan is going to look different, of course, but I think there's three main parts. One is to assess your needs, to make your self-care plan work for you. And the next is to be realistic about what self-care is going to look like in your life, to make it sustainable. And third, and I think most important, is to make self-care a priority, to make time for it, not to find time for it. And that might involve scheduling intentional self-care time rather than putting it at the bottom of the to-do list for when you've finished everything else, as well as looking at, okay, what self-care practices are quite quick and don't take too much energy so I can do them every day, and which ones are a bit more of an investment, whether that's time or money. So, for example, if you are looking to improve your body image or seeking to heal and improve your relationship with your body, quick daily practices might involve mindful stretching, right? Just a couple of minutes of caring for your body in that way, or a daily gratitude list towards your body. Whereas more weekly or monthly investments might be going to group therapy about body relationship, or listening to inspiring podcast about body image. So just some examples of what might be bigger in terms of timing and smaller, but they're all valuable. We'll jump on to the next slide. So there are countless self-care ideas out there. I just wanted to present a teeny amount to maybe inspire you or get you thinking creatively about the possibilities. To see that there's such a spectrum from, engaging with your altruistic values and connecting with people and perspective through volunteering, to being inspired by art by going to an art gallery. Or it might be saying no to someone to give yourself a bit of time and energy and align with having space for what you need to do. Even cleaning up can be an act of self-care, right? Not always super enjoyable, but the result of it can be really wonderful. So again, when you're thinking of what self-care might look like for you, what it might mean to you, you can bring it back to this nourishment idea of, how do I want to care for my body and my heart, as well as my mind and my time, and letting that evolve as you reflect through your life. In my last slide, I wanted to offer some further information on self-care if you're curious. Of course, there's lots out there that's not listed here. But starting with, honestly, I recommend reading anything by Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde. They're fantastic. But if you search online, you can find specific texts by either of them on self and community care. And then there's a few books by clinicians and authors that speak to our relationship with self-care and the world as it is today, all the demands that we have to keep up with. And if you're more of a listening type person, there's a wonderful podcast called Struggle Care, which focuses on how to make self-care more gentle and realistic, rather than feeling like we have to do 17 self-care items before noon every day. So I hope that these are valuable to you, and I'm going to pass you along back to Kaela.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maeve. I think the piece that stands out to me there is all the different parts of self that can be and arguably like need to be attended to through self-care. And that sometimes self-care is uncomfortable so that your life and soul and mind and everything can actually be more comfortable. So it's beautiful. I raise my hand to certain things that you did as well, where, lots of people I hear in my practice like love baths. And I'm like, a bath would not be a form of self-care for me. That is not up my alley. But for many people it is. And I think it again brings to the higher theme of anything to do with mental health and self-care. It really is such a unique list of things, and to make sure that everybody listening, that that whatever is yours, and that's wonderful. And if it's somebody else's, it doesn't need to be yours. So making sure that you allow yourself to personalize your self-care plan so that it actually does what it intends to do, so that it actually nourishes you on those many fronts. Wonderful. Thank you, Maeve. I'm now going to jump in and introduce Poonam Jassi. Poonam is a vice president of operations at Functionability and a board member of ours here at Looking Glass Foundation. She's going to speak to movement. We are very much excited to have you here, Poonam, and to hear your presentation and its connection to mental health.
Great, thank you so much. And I do think that some of what I'm going to present ties into some of the things that have been spoken about earlier. So it's great to be kind of at the end of this. So the goal for me today is to provide some actionable insights on incorporating movement into daily life to enhance mental health. Go to the next slide. So to start off, what is movement? So anytime we're engaging the body in intentional physical activity, that is what we can consider movement, even if it is gentle. So it can include activities like walking. We talked about stretching already today, gentle dancing, yoga. Those are some examples. We're looking at reconnecting the body with our specific fitness goals, whatever those may be. It can broadly encompass any form of physical engagement. And we want to really understand that movement is accessible and inclusive. It's suitable for all ages and all fitness levels. And movement itself can foster a positive connection with one's body as well as promote well-being. Slide. So movement actually benefits everyone. It supports mental health across all population by enhancing mood, reducing stress, and boosting overall well-being. We can talk about how even gentle movements can improve mental health. There's been studies that show that Tai Chi, which most people know about, it's very gentle and it can be shown to show improvements in mental health. Things like walking can also be found to reduce some symptoms of depression. Movement has preventative benefits. So not just, what you're going through now, but to also help prevent things in the future. Right. So sometimes when we think about incorporating movement into our life, it can be overwhelming. How much do I need to do? How much is required? When do I need to do it? All of those types of things, where in actuality, any bit of movement counts. When we move even in gentle ways, like stretching or going for a short walk, we are increasing our psychological well-being and supporting in our mental health. It is more important that we're consistently doing it over when and how intense and what types in order to have those continual preventative benefits of the movement. Research has indicates that even as little as 5 to 10 minutes of gentle movement per day has its benefits. And we encourage starting sort of with small, manageable amounts of movement, if movement is new to you, to start building that habit. And then gradually you can increase to lead more sustained benefits without it feeling overwhelming. So when we talk about some low intensity movements that can be part of your daily routine, we've already mentioned stretching. Stretching can improve flexibility, reduce muscle tension. In particular, it can promote relaxation, increase blood flow, and release endorphins, which can contribute to a better overall mental state. Walking, you can, incorporate short leisurely walks that promote your circulation and your relaxation, especially if you can have a walk in a nice park or by a lake or on the beach. Light yoga, sometimes people might find yoga to be intimidating when there is, different levels of yoga. There's chair yoga, there's, some light options as well that can enhance both your physical and mental well-being without strenuous effort. We already mentioned Tai Chi, that's another option. Casual cycling, if you're able to do that in a way, it can be not overly demanding as well as beneficial. And household activities, we talked about cleaning up, light chores, gardening, tidying up, gentle cleaning, that does keep your body moving and has the same positive benefits. it's really important to understand here that movement, not exercise, is a key factor in maintaining mental health. When we're speaking about individuals with eating disorders, movements can be fraught with anxiety or compulsive behaviors. Hence, it's very important to reframe that to movement is gentle, non-pressured, and mood enhancing to be helpful in recovery. So how does movement enhance well-being? Oxygenation, we're getting that oxygen into our body, we're increasing the flow to the brain and the body, which enhance that cognitive function. Ally talked about that cognitive function, being able to have those executive thought processes, make decisions, being able to respond to those emails. All of that is increased when you have the adequate oxygen flowing. Endorphin releases, so that's your feel-good chemicals. So having that movement will help boost those natural chemicals. There's also BDNF production. So this is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is important in maintaining brain health. So that is released when there is movement. And then physical health overall. So maintaining physical function, which can help with your tiredness, improve your energy levels, all of those things that we're trying to achieve. So speaking in more detail of movement and cognitive function, when we have that movement in our sort of daily routines, we're looking at enhancing our memory, our attention. I spoke on the executive function. It supports neurogenesis and synaptic plasticity. So our brains are these amazing organisms that can still stretch and grow as we age. And the more movement that we're able to incorporate helps to support that. Movement stimulates brain regions associated in memory, doing an executive function. So helping in things like planning ahead, meeting goals, having self-control, following multi-step directions, even when you're interrupted. So all of that is part of your executive function. When you're looking at aging population, movement definitely also helps in maintaining the cognitive function as we age. There is research that shows that even gentle physical activities such as walking and stretching can positively affect cognitive function in older adults. So we want to emphasize the low pressured strategies. Again, start small, begin with a few minutes of movement and gradually increase at whatever point of your day that it feels comfortable for you. You don't have to feel like you have to wake up and have the movement right away. You might find it's, easier for you to do in the evening, when the sun is setting, if that's sort of the time where it makes sense. None of that matters. Just, start with a few minutes and gradually increase. Find activities that are enjoyable for you. Not everybody enjoys yoga or cycling. Maybe that's not, for you. Maybe it's more the walks, or maybe you do enjoy the housework. Find what it is that you enjoy and integrate that into your routine. Try, if you can, to incorporate it on a daily basis, any small amounts, but don't be upset with yourself if you're unable to. Anything that you can do will make a difference. So, try your best. And if one day you're not able to and you are the next, then that's great. Try to really focus on non-performance goals. So, I talked a little bit about how long does it have to be? What type of movement does it have to be? Let's not focus on that, but more, let's focus on how it makes you feel. Before I go into conclusion, I wanted to share just a few ideas of how you can get moving in the community. There are, if you look at your local community centers, they have program guides that change over the seasons. There's lots of opportunities to get involved there, and they're generally cost effective and are adaptable for different fitness exertion levels. So I spoke to yoga, they have different levels there. They do have stretch classes, dance classes, and Tai Chi. So I would look into your local community centers for that. Most communities have walking groups. It's something you might just want to quickly Google and see if it matches, the type of walking that you'd like to do, and there's different groups that are out there. Also, it was mentioned about occupational therapy or anyone sort of in your health team that could help create that movement plan, understanding, where you'd like to be with it. A tailored plan can be made that may help you follow it more than, having to sort of create it on your own. So it's definitely opportunities there. So overall, I just wanted to emphasize how movement is powerful and it's accessible for enhancing mental health and overall well-being, especially its impact on the mood, reducing anxiety, and improving that cognitive function and resilience. We talked about this a few times, but really starting small will help and make a big difference, and just building from there. It is beneficial for everyone, not just those with mental health challenges, but everyone can benefit from having movement into their day-to-day life. So I hope some of these strategies can help incorporate that in a proactive way for the listeners. Thank you.
Thanks, Poonam. I really loved the suggestions there around community. I think one of the a healthy step in our mental health is finding people that we can connect with. We know that isolation doesn't usually serve our mental health. And so finding ways through movement that we could connect through those walking groups or things along those lines, I think sometimes it allows for sort of unknown connections to form, friendships perhaps to even form, and ways to feel less isolated and like you're a part of a community, which is wonderful. Great. Well, thank you everybody for your presentations. I think we're going to open it up now to some questions. If there's anything in particular for people that's standing out, if there's anything for a particular panelist you'd like to ask, just please drop our name into the question and answer box, and we will jump in individually there. And then there's also allowed to be general questions. Melissa, I know that you are managing the questions in part on your end. So if there's anything that you want to raise or ask a question, and then we can jump in and answer.
Yeah. Have a few already. So yeah, please continue to add these in for everyone out there. If we start touching on something and discussing something that it makes you think of something else that you're curious about and you want to go further, just drop that in. Kaela, one of the first questions is for you. Coming in a little hot. You mentioned when you were speaking that I think about 89-90% of clients who do not have a diagnosis would qualify for an eating disorder. Can you just clarify, confirm, and perhaps speak to why you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I have to also highlight that I'm an eating disorder therapist, so that people that are coming to me, they're coming to me with these issues kind of front of mind. Most people have more clinical distress in their relationship with food when they are coming to me. Their habits and behaviors are severely limiting their life. They're occurring typically either multiple times a day or daily or multiple times a week, which would meet criteria based on how our medical system, again, that's just one system for determining an eating disorder. Let's be mindful, it is not the only system for determining an eating disorder. So let's be very, clear on that. But I think, the majority of people that I work with, they have clinically significant, I would argue, like destructive relationships with food and body. And so most don't have access to a formal diagnosis, largely because the formal diagnosis comes from our medical system. And I think we're all quite aware of how few people even have GPs, yet alone access to the specialists who would diagnose those disorders, the psychiatrists in primarily our provincial programs. And so please know that if you are struggling or you're finding your relationship with food and body is impacting your life day in and day out in ways that lead to a change in behaviors and significant mental distress, that counts, okay, whether you have the diagnosis or not. That is highly relevant and very much something you deserve to receive support on and to validate internally. I think that's often the piece I see missing, that if there is no formal diagnosis, a medical professional to have told you that you have an eating disorder, it can lead to people saying that maybe they don't, or it's not that bad, or other people have it worse. And by all means, both myself and us here at Looking Glass would strongly disagree that if you are suffering, you are suffering, and that suffering counts.
Kaela.
Yeah.
Another question that opened up to everybody. Nobody was specified, and I think it applies to everybody. Sorry, I'm going to contextualize this, but I think one of the reasons people maybe refrain from acting is that it feels kind of overwhelming of where to even start. So the question is, do any of you have tips for being gentle with yourself when trying to incorporate some of these strategies? It's easy to get down when you break a positive routine, even for a day or two, and then sometimes it becomes even more discouraging to start again. So tips for being gentle with yourself to start.
Panelists, any of you want to jump in?
Panelists, yeah.
Be the only one speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Any personal tips, Maeve? Yeah.
One that I return to a lot in trying to make any change in my life or do anything difficult where there's going to be slip ups or challenges or roadblocks is to, when that shame or blame or negative self-talk comes up, is to pause and think, what would I say to someone I really care about if they were in this situation or feeling this way? And just having that other perspective for me really helps to shift the negative self-talk and have some kindness and useful gentleness towards myself.
Wonderful. Ally or Poonam, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that was great. I was going to say self-compassion too, Maeve. And yeah, just reminding yourself that, suffering is part of our common humanity, right? We all suffer. We all make, not even make mistakes, right? And I think too, when I first started out in my practice, I was so, gung-ho about SMART goals and, okay, how long are you going to do it for? And, how do you know you're measuring success? And I feel like the more that I practice, the more that I throw that out the window. And I say, I think when we say, okay, well, am I succeeding if I've done it 10 days in a row? Well, on the 9th day, if you don't do it, then we're negating all of that hard work we put in, right? And we start to say, okay, well, now I'm a failure. So what if we looked at it from, each day as a new opportunity, right? To set an intention and see if that works out. And if it didn't, what did we learn from that, right? And then using that self-compassion, like Maeve said. So that would be, yeah, just add on to Maeve.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, I would say, when we're not focusing on the trying to quantify everything and really focus on the feeling. So, I don't feel great right now because I missed a day, but let me remember how I felt the last day I did it. When I had that stretching or I had that great walk, it was such a beautiful day and I came home and I just felt amazing. I'm going to focus on trying to get back to that instead of, ruminating in the fact that maybe I wasn't able to do that yesterday. So really focus on the feeling versus the measuring.
Wonderful. I think to just add to that, like there's so many other ways to feel well. So if we were to refer to this around movement and perhaps not moving on a day that you had planned to move, like maybe that's because you honored your need for sleep, right? And that counts and that matters, right? Or if you're noticing certain things were hard on your nutrition front, sometimes that's because you're pushing in other ways. And so everything usually adds up and we can be building and working on improving our life, improving our mental health, but we can't usually do it all at once. We can't have all the exercise goals, all the nutrition goals, all the self-care goals, all the sort of like mental health goals all being met at once. That's just not within anybody's capacity because we still have a life we have to live within that. So I think it's really important to recognize that if you're feeling low on one front, to try to see the other ways that you are meeting your needs and that you are prioritizing other forms of mental health along the way.
This is a very specific question that I actually don't understand. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. It's for Ally. Could you speak about eating and the Serartin, Serartin in your guts?
I think this is about serotonin in the gut.
Okay,
Yes,
that I know what that is.
Yeah, so I guess generally, you know, when you think about, there's so many things that impact the release of serotonin. You know, one major one that we talked about today was the gut microbiome, right? So this kind of bidirectional relationship where the bacteria in our gut, when it's fed, you know, with those prebiotic fibers and the lots of, you know, with lots of kind of food that they get, they can create different components like short chain fatty acids and other components that really help keep our cells, or we call them enterocytes, but our gut cells really healthy and functioning well. And so if our cells are functioning well, then they can do our job, like creating that serotonin in the gut, which then, you know, both our gut and our brain use to communicate. Also carbohydrates, there's a really there's a relationship there where the, you know, the carbs that we ingest really helps to you know, foster that pathway where serotonin is released, right? So there's so much that nutrition impacts the serotonin. So yeah, hopefully I kind of answered that question, but yeah, there's lots of cool research out there in terms of taking care of our gut bugs and our neurotransmitters.
Actually have another one completely different for you, Ally. I'm just going to keep going in nutrition. So this is from somebody who is a mature person, an older person who has a long life with an eating disorder and resulted in an impacted digestive system that's gone off the rails. So there's limited foods that they can tolerate without feeling nauseous. They know this is a big topic, but just you know, a suggestion on the approach for renourishment here.
Yeah, good question. And I feel like you're so not alone in feeling that way, right? I think why recovery is so hard sometimes is because, okay, you're having your healthcare team tell you to eat, and your body is giving you feedback like bloating or pain or constipation, right? And it's so hard to work through that. Some of the reasons why that might be happening, you know, let's say we have been restricting, we've been losing a lot of muscle mass. We forget that our gut is made out of muscle, right? So we might be having some muscle loss in our gut. Things aren't moving along as they should. We might be, you know, not having as diverse of a microbiome, right? So they're not doing their job as well. So when I help my clients with this, you know, I think it's important to kind of just start with the first step, right? And the first step really is, okay, well, how do we eat enough of our safer foods or our more tolerated foods in order to start healing the body, right? So even if you have, let's say, 20 tolerable foods, can we start to eat more of these foods so that we are just meeting our general energy needs? And then can we start to add in, you know, foods almost systematically while mitigating some of your symptoms, right? So that might look like using a hot water bottle after you eat to help with some of the cramping. It might be using maybe like a really safe, like something to kind of get the piping going, right? If that's one of your concerns. Maybe it's reflux, right? If you're having acid reflux, what are some of the triggers that might be happening? How can we mitigate that? So just know that if you are dealing with digestive issues, there's lots that we can do, and the best way is through. So I always say it's always going to get worse until it gets better, but it is so much better on the other side, and you're not alone in those symptoms.
Thank you, Ally. Kaela, this one's for you. For someone who is a people pleaser and has a hard time expressing their own needs, do you have any tips for gaining the courage to start setting external boundaries?
A very good question. I mean, I think one of the things that's most important to look at is in the moment, things are harder, right? So sometimes a boundary gets crossed, and then in the moment we're like, oh, and the defense of people pleasing comes in, and it can feel quite difficult to set that boundary. I always recommend that people give themselves permission to go back. So if they say, for example, to make this really simple, like yes to something that they really felt they needed to say no to, or if they fell into the same family pattern and the role in their family and didn't set boundaries with loved ones the way they needed to, if afterwards that's sitting with them and it's really affecting how they're feeling and they're not feeling sort of confident in that, or that it's supporting their mental health, I think it can be really healthy to give yourself permission to go back and to say, you know, I've sat and I thought on this, and like I've decided that actually doesn't work for me, and this would work better for me instead, right? So again, giving them that corrective behavior that would actually facilitate your boundary being respected and you being treated the way that you would like to be treated. I think in the moment our anxiety kind of comes rushing in, and then we can freeze, and it can be tough, but being able to go back, or even to communicate with yourself and say, how did it feel? Again, for example, saying yes when I really wanted to say no, and can I look at the cost to myself for not setting that boundary? I think so often we fear the impact of on our dynamics and in our relationships, and we're so used to being the person that people pleases, but we don't recognize that there's a really heavy cost to doing that. So if we start to pay attention to the cost of people pleasing, then sometimes making those steps in the future, or saying like, I thought about that, and last time I said yes, it didn't work for me, so this time I'm going to practice saying no, I think is really important. We can also give ourselves time, which could be like, can I get back to you on that? Can I take a moment to think about that? Even if we have a couple lines going into those types of engagements that give us a bit of time so that we can actually think about our answer, is really important.
Great. Great. And I just have one final question, but it is for everybody. I would like to know, what are each of your personal favorite self-care activities, your go-tos when you just know you need it, you need to, as Maeve said, not find time, but make time for it. What's the thing that you choose?
I can start, and then everybody can follow. For me, nature would be probably my biggest one. I think if I can get out, especially at this time of year, fall is my season. I love fall. So being out and, you know, watching the leaves rustle, being typically actually either like alone in nature, like not really, really busy places, or with a close friend. I would say socializing, connecting with the loved ones in my life that I feel I'm my most authentic self, can really facilitate those experiences. So, and I would also say disconnecting. I think probably not having my phone, getting away from my phone can be difficult for me, but every time I do it, I'm really grateful, and I actually feel way more human when I do that. So those would be some of my favorites.
Just to piggyback off of Kaela, yeah, like off leash walking with my dog in the forest. That is like my favorite thing. She's a menace on leash, so it's definitely a lot more enjoyable. And definitely stretching, whether it's like yoga or I've been really into this app. If anyone's interested, it's called Bend, but it's, you know, really easy, kind of 5-minute, 10-minute, you can choose. I often do it in between clients where I'll just stretch at my desk, and I feel like it really helps.
For me, it'd be digging into a new book. I think I generally don't have time to do that. So if I make that productive time, whether it's with a warm cup of tea or you know, a cup of coffee, just to sit and read in peace and kind of get involved and absorbed with the story in front of me, that's one thing that I love.
For me, I think I have quite a variety. I jump between about two that are really nourishing me right now are using a ball to roll out muscles. I have some chronic pain, and it's one of those self-care practices that kind of sucks in the moment, but you feel so much better afterwards, and having that gentle reminder of, right, this is worth it, this is care. is wonderful. And then watching certain comedy shows with my partner, they have a hilarious laugh. So it's not just funny to watch the show, but I get to connect with my partner and their wonderful laughs. So those are really nourishing me right now.
Thanks, Maeve. That's awesome. And Kaela, maybe you can just close us out as we hit the 1:15 mark here.
So I want to thank everybody for coming today and for investing in your mental health. Mental health is such an important thing for us to think about, to talk about, and to invest in. So thanks for making the time, for sharing with us and looking at ways that you can improve your own mental health, or at least connect to your own mental health. If you or anybody you know is struggling, please know that we are here for you. You can reach out to us at the Looking Glass Foundation. We would love to be able to provide you with more support and be able to meet you where you're at on your own mental health journey. We will reach out and also let people know about everybody here and the work that they are doing. If there's anybody that would have further questions for any of our panelists today, we'd love to be able to answer them. Please know that as we head out into the, well, at least in Vancouver, the sunny, sunshiny weather, I hope you can all take the time to take care of yourselves, to take a moment to even digest what stood out for you today. And then again, to reach out if anything is feeling like it's bringing up questions or concerns for you. We are here. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maeve, Ally, and Poonam for being here and sharing space with us all. And we will be in touch.